Topaz has a hardness of 8, and is the type mineral for that hardness on the Mohs hardness scale. It also makes a nice gemstone, so I bought a couple of crack stones to recut. It's a good thing they were already broken, because I showed them to my wife and daughter when they arrived, and they, I won't say which one, immediately dropped one, creating a new, much larger crack to get cut out. We're going to cut them down to get rid of the window and the cracks, and to see the performance of Scott Labourie's design Titan. I think of it as a spin on the classic standard round brilliant, and I've cut it before, but not in Topaz. The first thing to do is to cut out the flaws, so I have a better sense of what's left to work with. Too often, I don't spend enough time preforming a stone, only to find out that I should have dopped it up a couple of millimeters one way or another, which doesn't sound like much, but when you're working with sub 10 millimeter stones, that could lead to a drop in size of 20% or more. Sometimes buying cheap, cracked, or less ideal cut stones is a good way to get a more or less preformed stone that you can then use to recut and make more brilliant or whatnot. After some very rough preforming at 360 grit, I dopped them using my hybrid wax superglue method, and I wasn't as careful as I should have been and didn't get the smaller stone where it needed to be, so I tried fixing it by reheating the wax, but it popped off immediately when I tried faceting, so that had to get redopped up later. Fortunately, that kind of mistake tends to happen early in these projects before I get underway and cut a lot of material, and after that initial hurdle, both stones cut really without issue. My lap sequence has changed slightly since I started faceting. I used to go 360, 600, 1200, polish, but found that jump from 1200 to polish was a little too much for some stones, leading to really long polishing times, especially with sapphire. Now I go from 360 to 600, sometimes using 1200, and then 3000 on copper, and finally my 50K grit polish with diamond on tin. Now Topaz is a lovely stone to cut, in that it behaves and takes a good polish unless you just happen to hit that cleavage plane, which can sometimes happen, especially if you don't know what you're originally starting with, if you have a rounded Topaz or something. And because of the way it behaved, I actually skipped 1200 grit for this entirely. Now that I think about it, I actually skipped 600 for some of the finer facets, leaving those to be cut in at 3000 grit. It helps that they're smaller stones. I did make one big mistake though. I was a little bit sick during the week I cut these, and apparently in my delirium I didn't polish the pavilion on the smaller stone, leaving it with a 3000 grit finish. That was something that I only found out when I took it out of the acetone, but to be honest, I don't hate how it turned out, but stay tuned to see what you think. Now, because the stones were so windowed, I had to lose quite a bit of diameter and resulting carat weight on them to close them up. But I much prefer the brilliance and fire that now shows through compared to the original stones, which admittedly do have a more consistent, maybe brighter blue color. There is always a trade-off between color and brilliance when cutting, and everyone has their preference. Buy what you like and what speaks to you. My knee-jerk reaction is to close all the windows, but this gives you an idea of the price that must be paid to achieve that look.